Ladies and gentlemen, good morning. You are currently tuned in to the the Jamaica Civil Service Association High School Debate Competition for 2025. Yes, this is the national tournament put on by the Jamaica Civil Service Association, and you're watching the semi-finals of this competition. Of course, this match would not have been possible without the JCSA, and we're so happy that they decided to continue this competition. You will see that the title of this competition is 2025. That's not a typo. This competition was originally scheduled to end during Civil Service Week in 2025. However, because of the devastation wrought by Hurricane Melissa, the competition had to be postponed. But nonetheless, we're back and we're almost at the grand finals. That's right, ladies and gentlemen. You are tuned in to semi-finals match number 1. I am Ravon Thomas Matthews and I'll be a chair judge for this match. Now, of course, on my panel are two other excellent adjudicators from Jade who I'll ask to introduce themselves, starting with Mr. Jerome Reynolds.
All right, pleasant morning, everyone. My name is Jerome Reynolds, and I will be one of your wing adjudicators. I look forward to an exciting match and let the best team win.
Thank you so much, Jerome. And of course, our other judge for this match, Diego Nelson.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chair. My name is Diego Nelson, and likewise with my panel, I'm also very much looking forward to a very interesting clash of ideas from both teams. All the best.
All right, there you go, teams. You have been charged. Speaking of teams, our two institutions who will be debating today, they would have fought valiantly from 2025 all the way over into 2026. They would have secured their spot in this semi-final round in proposition Wolmer's Boys School and in opposition, Cornwall College. At this point in time, I'd like to take the opportunity to invite you to speak to our semi-finalists. First, Wolmer's Boys School. Please introduce yourselves.
Morning all, my name is Josh Cole. I am the first proposition speaker and Prime Minister for this event.
Good morning all, I am Jordan Dixon and I'm the Deputy Prime Minister and second Speaker of the House competition.
Good morning all, my name is Alvin Williams and I will serve as Vice Speaker.
All right, thank you very much, Wolmer's Boys School, and of course, in opposition, Cornwall College.
Good day, my name is Tequan Ellis. I'm the Mario Ferguson. And I'm Andrew Timothy from the college.
All right. Ladies and gentlemen, the motion before this House reads, this House believes that normalizing mental health leave will meaningfully improve workplace culture. Once more, this House believes that normalizing mental health leave will meaningfully improve workplace culture. Of course, this debate is governed by the JADE parliamentary format. In this format of debate, we will see the first speakers present their case within 7 minutes. The second speakers will have 6 minutes to present their case, and the third and final speakers from either team will have 5 minutes to present their case. The first and last minute of each speech is considered protected time in which no points of information will be allowed. Outside of protected time, points of information are not only allowed, but we absolutely encourage them. Of course, unique to the JADE parliamentary format are 2 periods of cross-examination, and I'll tell you all about them when we get to that part of the debate. And so, with all that said, my friends, we open this debate, the semi-finals match officially, by inviting the first speaker from Wolmer's Boys School, Joshnell Powell.
Just checking that I am still audible.
Loud and clear, Joshnell.
Okay, I'll begin my speech. My next word. I'm first prop for the motion. This House believes that normalizing health or mental health leave rather will meaningfully improve workplace culture. Let me define a few key terms. Mental health leave here is not a special treatment. It's a routine and unstigmatized leave period, equating to the level of normal sickness and reduces the stigma towards mental health breaks. To normalize, we refer to removing stigma from something, making it more conventional and commonplace within the workplace. And workplace culture refers to the shared ideas, values, beliefs, and attitudes that guide and define an organization's personality and how these employees interact and work. Additionally, to meaningfully improve something is not perfection, but is a significant positive shift. Our burdens here is that we have to prove to you, panel, that the cost of not implementing mental health leave versus the cost of implementing it is significantly greater. We also need to prove, or rather we don't need to prove that this is a best mechanism, but we only need to prove a positive causal link between mental health leave and meaningful improvement in workplace culture. Here's the framing. The motion calls into question which reality will improve workplace culture, and ultimately we believe that whichever party in this debate can solve the most issues faced in the context of the workplace in Jamaica currently would best achieve this. The clarity here is that we're not promoting unending leave. Our model is, however, optimized to lead to improvement in workplace dynamics and still avoid exploitation. Here is the model. It's a double mechanism, so bear with me. It's going to be a part of the sick leave program, and it's not a new framework, but it's just another addition. It works on the same prior request basis. In status quo, we see a 2 weeks paid allowance to everybody for sick leave. We're going to give the same allowance for mental health. Additionally, medical consultation is going to be heavily encouraged, and it's also a requirement if this period of absence exceeds 3 days. And in addition to all of that, if persons are more willing to have mental health conversations on our side of the house, because it's going to be accepted as a normal element of work life, and that culture shift comes directly as a result of this model. My first claim is that mental health improvement directly correlates with better workers and better workplace culture. My first warrant here is that mental health leave recalibrates employees and produces a multifaceted return on investment upon re-entry. This is a medical perspective, and there are two things here. Firstly, in 2023, a study would have found that employees who took structured mental health leave reported a 40% increase in focus and task completion rates upon return. And this is because cortisol levels decrease significantly during rest, and this directly restores the brain's capacity for sustained attention and complex reasoning. The analysis here is that a returning employee is not coming back to their baseline performance, they're returning above it, and it produces our first counterfactual, or our first net positive, in which we see that individual performance recovery is something that is achieved. In the counterfactual, the employee who never left continues to operate below that standard and tank productivity. The second thing, the American Institute of Stress would have found that burnout is actually contagious. And this means that teams with one exhausted member show elevated stress markers across the whole group. And in addition to this, Mr. Speaker, the inverse is equally true. A recharged employee models sustainable work behavior and signals that that recovery is both possible and institutionally supported, and this produces the second net positive. My second warrant here is that rested employees humanize the workplace and transforms it from a place of survival into genuine connection. In 2022, a study would have found that employees operating under chronic stress showed a 61% reduction in positive social interactions with colleagues. Things like casual conversation, collaborative humor, spontaneous peer support. These things took a tank. The report found that when the inverse additionally is equally true. Lower stress teams report significantly higher psychological safety, stronger peer trust, and lower interpersonal conflicts. When somebody is overwhelmed, it activates their brain's threat response system, and that narrows social cognition and makes them more guarded, more reactive, and less capable of empathetic interaction. And the rest that we provide for them reverses this process. The analysis here is that stress does not just make employees less productive, it makes them less human at work. The jokes, the check-ins, the team lunch, the informal rituals that build workplace culture disappear first under pressure. And rest therefore operates as a dual mechanism. It simultaneously restores positive interaction and dissolves negative tension. The impacts here: reduce stress, increase psychological safety, and a reduction of interpersonal conflict. And the big outcome here is that persons that come back are coming back more productive and coming back more human, which is an overall net positive for the workplace, because the culture, the abstract side of the culture is preserved. My second claim is that mental health leave is the best mechanism at accomplishing better mental health and workplace culture. My first one, existing mechanisms have failed because they're discretionary, and mental health leave is not. The evidence here is that in Jamaican workplaces, we've seen interventions, we've seen wellness days, we've seen stress management training, and all of these have been introduced introduced over and over again, yet hierarchical rigidity, nepotism, and psychological unsafety continue to persist as the main problems within the Jamaican working environment. The reason is structural. These interventions are opt-in and discretionary, meaning that they're easily ignored. They're underfunded or selectively applied by the very managers who perpetuate the problems that they are designed to solve. The analysis here is that mental health leave is fundamentally different because it's non-discretionary. And once it's formalized into policy, it can't be withheld based on a manager's personal bias or some other issue. A wellness day can be cancelled, a counseling program can be defunded, but a legal leave entitlement cannot be quietly removed, and that is why no alternative beats it. My second warrant is that mental health leave is uniquely systemic. It targets the institution and not just the individual. Every existing mental health intervention in Jamaican workplaces, it targets the individual employee, things like therapy referrals and wellness apps, treating the workplace dysfunction as a personal problem to be handled privately rather than an institutional failure to be publicly addressed. And we think that mental health leave reverts this entirely by forcing policy accountability and cultural acknowledgement at the organizational level. It becomes the only intervention capable of addressing Jamaica's major workplace dysfunctions, which are hierarchical rigidity, which is challenged when leadership is formally required to endorse and approve leave. We see nepotism being undermined when leave becomes a standardized and rule-based entitlement applying to all staff. We see psychological safety psychological unsafety being dissolved when the organization institutionally signals that vulnerability is a reality. And I'll go into my last one today, which is really a preemptive here, because we believe that UP is likely to tell us that mental health leave does not solve the underlying causes of stress, which is workplace dysfunction. But I'm here to tell you that mental health leave forces institutional accountability. A 2019 report would have found that mental health disclosures in organizations with formalized leave policies increased by 67%, and critically, these disclosures are created institutional records and force HR departments to respond. The impacts here in our world, Jamaica's embedded dysfunctions are challenged directly, and also our imposed structures, imposed balances finally meet something that they cannot cancel, which is a legal entitlement. With all of that said, proud to propose.
And thank you very much for that fiery start to this debate. Wolmer's Boys School. That was, ladies and gentlemen, Josh Nell Powell. And so, to open the debate for side opposition, Cornwall College, we invite their first speaker, Tequan Ellis.
Just a quick note, Ravon. I think they're having some difficulties. However, I'm just asking, persons to be visual, because I think there was a point of information that was being asked during the presentation. However, we weren't able to hear it. So just be a little bit more attentive or ask teams.
All right. So I thank you very much, Jerome. I see you, Tequan. Go again.
Are we audible?
I can hear you, Tequan.
Okay. Am I being heard clearly?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Good. Okay. So in the case that we're not able to be heard for our points of information, can we raise our hands?
Yeah, we must confirm that that's okay, that you'll be able to identify them through a raise of hands.
Ravon, I don't think in the middle of the speech it's going to be the best for us to do so. Maybe some sort of indication from the panel assist, but I don't think we're in a position to.
All right. Yeah, okay. So I'll act as middleman for that then, in the event that your point of information is not being heard. All right. So ready when you are, Tequan.
Okay. I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, honorable panel, fellow debaters, good day. My name is Tequan Ellis, and I stand in proud opposition of the motion brought before the House. This House believes that normalizing mental health leave will meaningfully improve workplace culture. Very importantly, right, this debate isn't about whether or not mental health leave can be useful. Our proposition, rather, have miscontextualized the burdens of the debate. The burden of the debate is not to prove that mental health leave can do some good. It's to prove that it can transform culture. That is the nuance in the debate. It says meaningfully improve culture. That means there has to be a significant shift in cultural change, right? Now, we do see where it can be beneficial to some individuals, but we ask if it transforms workplace culture, which includes the everyday systems and expectations that shape how people work. In a nutshell, we argue that mental health leave removes workers from toxic environments temporarily, but it does nothing to change the environment itself. Allow us to clarify what the debate is about and what it's not about. Workplace culture refers to the norms and structures that define how work is organized, including things like workload expectations, management practices, promotion incentives, and the everyday pressures workers face. So to win this debate, proposition has to prove more than simply that people feel better in their world, but they have to show that policy will change how workplaces function from day to day. Now that's cleared up. Allow me to get into some rebuttals. Now they base their whole case around this argument of stigma, right? They tell us that normalization removes stigma and that leads to employees feeling safe and that leads to workplace culture improving. Now, we say that stigma doesn't come from normalization. It comes from structural consequences, not the lack of normalization. Once again, these structural consequences are that if you take too much mental health leave, your boss will see you as what? Unreliable. And we see this with people that have chronic illness. I'll take that point.
That's not how we frame this. You can't take more than a year acquired mental health leave because it's a limit. And so that's
I said anything about a year. I said taking mental health leave puts you as being unreliable. That is what I said. Whether it's you want to take 1 day every week, whether it's you want to take 1 day every other week, we are saying that taking that leave, in as much as you take that leave, your manager sees you as unreliable. And we see that with people that constantly take with physical leave, right? You're unreliable to your worker, right? So now we say that workers fear things like losing promotions, being seen as unreliable, and retaliation from management. And if those incentives remain, the stigma remains. So we don't buy that argument that you actually fix stigma. So now let's look into context. We say external crises are things that include things like illness or death of a loved one, loss of property, or divorce. When a teacher tells you their parent passed away, you don't expect to see them back at work next day. Basic human compassion already normalizes these external crises. So there's no meaningful improvement as that aspect is already normalized. But now let's look at the stressors. I won't take that point. Globally and locally, workers experience high levels of stress, fatigue, and emotional exhaustion, with burnout increasingly common across various sectors. According to the Observer, here is what workers list as primary stressors: toxic environments with employees facing hostile supervisors, work-life imbalance due to high, often unmanageable workloads, and many employees working with insufficient resources. These are structural issues. Until you fix the structural issues, you can't have any meaningful improvement to workplace culture, because workplace culture is being impacted by these structural issues. Now, this shows us that the issues with workplace culture are largely structural, as I said, and the basis of our case is that mental health leave alone cannot meaningfully improve workplace culture, but rather we argue that to improve workplace culture, we need structural reform. Now, allow me to get into my first argument, and it use a bit of an analogy, right? Imagine you have a dirty pig in a muddy pen, right? What if you take the pig out of the pen and wash it and put it back in the same dirty pen? It's going to get dirty again. That's what mental health leave does, Mr. Speaker. We argue that mental health leave treats symptoms rather than the root causes of workplace stress. Now, most workplace burnout, as stated before, is due to structural pressures. And even though mental health leave policies expanded significantly after the pandemic, workplace well-being has not dramatically improved. According to Forbes, roughly 2/3 of the US workers are experiencing burnout, although mental health leave has become increasingly more normalized. This shows us that the real drivers of burnout is not the lack of policy, but rather workplace conditions. The mechanism is simple. When a worker burns out, leave removes them from the workplace temporarily, but it doesn't reduce their workload. It doesn't change their manager. It does not change the promotion system that rewards constant availability. That is why they don't want to take mental health leave, Mr. Speaker. When they return, the same pressure still exists. Workplace culture is defined by the environment employees face every day. So if we don't change the environment, the culture cannot change. Hence, normalizing mental health leave cannot meaningfully transform workplace culture. On to my second argument, we actually argue that it does more harm to individuals because it allows managers to throw a band-aid on a gaping wound. When workers burn out, they take leave to recover. But because the underlying conditions remain unchanged, they return to the same toxic environment and burn out again. The data shows that around 1 in 5 workers take time off for stress-related health health issues. But you know what doesn't change? The system. The system doesn't care that these workers are being burned out. But furthermore, we argue that when employees take leave, their colleagues often have to pick up their workload. And this increases pressure on the rest of the team, spreading burnout throughout the workplace. So then I ask you, what should the rest of the team do? Should they all take mental health leave? Will the workload disappear into thin air? Mr. Speaker, instead of actually improving culture, we start to see that their world becomes more unstable. And as I close panel, I want you to look at the worlds. Proposition offers relief after the damage is done, but opposition shows you why the damage keeps happening. So we argue that if you don't go down to the root cause, there can't be any change to culture. Their burden wasn't to prove that mental health leave can be good. It was to prove that normalizing it will lead to widespread transformation in how workers experience the workplace. Our burden was simply to prove that mental health leave won't bring about any meaningful change to the culture of the workplace. And we stand sure that without structural reform, there won't be any meaningful improvement to workplace culture. Mental health leave might be good, but by itself, it isn't meaningfully improving anything. As such, we are proud to stand in opposition of the motion today. Thank you. I'm Tequan Ellis.
Here, here. Thank you both opening speakers for engaging and setting the standard for this debate. Now, ladies and gentlemen, I would have indicated to you earlier that we have a period of cross-examination. We are at that point in the debate. For this period, we will see opposition ask 3 questions to team proposition. Each question will last 10 seconds and each answer will last 45 seconds. For the team asking the question, only one person may do so at a time. But for the team answering the question, the entire team can answer. All right, so after the 3 questions have been asked and answered by opposition and proposition respectively, we'll flip the arrangement and invite proposition to pose their 3 questions. With that said, ladies and gentlemen, we invite the team Cornwall College to open this first period of cross-examination.
Thank you. So we asked the question, if an employee takes leave, feels better and returns to the same workload and expectations, has the culture of the workplace actually changed, or are they still going back into the same system that made them need the mental health leave?
The fact of the matter is, and I'll expound on this further in my speech, that by actually introducing mental health, we change workplace culture on 3 different things, right? We create institutional visibility, which creates accountability for management, right? We also shift and change cultural systems and force performance systems to evolve, purely because managers now have to reevaluate how they actually see workers, not on presenteeism, but actually on their outputs and how they actually perform in the business.
And in addition to this, there's the financial incentive of, as a manager, I don't want my employees to be constantly leaving work. And so I'm going to focus on fixing my working environment in general so that persons don't want to leave in the first place or don't need that risk, because it's a comfortable and safe system to work within.
All right, thank you, Speaker. But even if we take that new shift in your case, right, isn't it true that managers already have blatant signals that their workers are burnt out? Like exit interviews, people literally tell managers that we're leaving because we're burnt out. We have things like high turnover rates. Your system still doesn't work even if you switch your case, Speaker.
Would be true if the system was actually implemented in status quo. This is not something that actually exists within the Jamaican work system. What you're referring to is sick leave. We're saying mental health leave is a new system in which persons are going to be open up to the conversation of mental health as a concept now, because we're directing funds into allowing persons to leave.
And the fact of the matter is, even with these exit interviews and managers knowing that the workers feel burnout, the fact of the matter is, because there's no paper trail, because there's no mechanism, no accountability can actually be held to these managers, and as such, they have no incentive to change, and there's no actual cost for these employers for not changing systems. And as a result, by implementing this, we actually force a cost and we force accountability, and we force these managers to actually invoke change, regardless of their empathy or not.
Within your counterfactual, there's no documenting system, by the way.
All right, thank you for that response. But Speaker, at the same time, we just can you explain how it is that mental health leave normalization won't just end up to them just using mental health leave as a band-aid and just throwing it on any problem that workers have, even whether it be the structural issues, I know it just starts to individualize the issues the workers have.
Okay, within my speech, I spoke about three structural issues, and you actually reiterated it. You spoke about hierarchical rigidity, we spoke about nepotism as a problem, and psychological unsafety. What we're telling you is that we've already mechanized for all three of these. How is it that mental health leave actually solves these problems systematically? And so, as a result of that, your claim about structural issues going uncontested, it doesn't actually materialize because we fully mechanize how it is that all these problems are addressed within the status quo, and these are the largest problems that workers are facing within the context of a Jamaican workplace right now. If we solve them, we win this debate because our model works. We don't need to prove that it's the best one, but just for Brata, we already did that. So.
All right, thank you very much. At this point in time, we invite Wolmer's Boys School to pose their three questions.
Okay, Speaker, firstly, given that meaningful improvement does not necessarily indicate perfection, how do you contend with the net positives that we achieve on our side of the house, such as better social interactions and increased productivity, which contribute meaningfully to workplace culture?
Speaker, as we've argued before, you can't increase productivity if the workers are staying in the same exact environment that has made them burnt out before. And now that you're shifting your case, Speaker, we still don't buy the case that mental health leave can fix the structural issues, and we still don't buy the case that there will be any significant improvement to the culture of the workplace, which includes the things that govern how the workplaces are run, not just how individuals are feeling, not just one employee feeling better, but the structure and the culture of the workplace itself.
Okay, you don't buy it, that's fine. But how can you defend an alternative that avoids institutional accountability due to a lack of formality and documentation, and in turn perpetuates the informal approach that breeds the systemic issues that you speak against?
Because the problem is not a lack of paper trails as you try to paint it. The problem is that managers truly don't care. That's the real issue, because they have it on paper that there's high turnover rates. Their employees are leaving. They're seeing it manifesting in front of them, and they are seeing these effects. They're bearing the effects. But do you know why they don't care? Structural reform is expensive, and we just don't buy the case that mental health leave normalization will just magically incentivize them to just fix the structure of the workplace. It's an impossible case to buy, Speaker.
Okay, final questions. If, according to you, managers don't care about the problems that workers are facing, contend with the fact that we impose a legal responsibility on them now, and so they have to care and they have to do something about it because they don't want to lose out on workers, they don't want to make financial losses, so they're going to want to retain these workers.
Could you repeat that question, please?
I said, according to you, managers do not care about the problems that workers are facing within the Jamaican status quo. Contend with how we impose now a legal responsibility on them to care and to actually fix these dysfunctional issues within the workplace society.
Speaker, okay, here's the problem, right? You can force mental health leave. That we understand that you're allowed to do that under the motion. No, what we don't buy is that you're allowed to force them to fix structural problems somehow, because now you're saying that the policy you're implementing is what is causing the actual impacts and the actual improvement in workplace culture by forcing them to reform the structure, not mental health leave itself. If your policy becomes too robust in this case, Speaker, then your mechanism goes from what it should be, which is normalize mental health to improve workplace culture. It goes from some robust policy into improve mental health, improve workplace culture. So now, Speaker, we want to find out if it is truly mental health leave that's doing this or your policy. And it's your policy that would be causing the improvement, not mental health leave.
All right, thank you very much. The debate continues to heat up. The debate continues to excite. At this point in time, we're going to invite the second speaker from Team Wolmer's Boys School, Jordan Dixon, to extend the case for team proposition.
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
I'll begin my speech in 3, 2, 1. I'm second proposition speaker for the motion. This House believes that normalizing mental health leave will meaningfully improve workplace culture. I'll comment on something that first up said a while ago. They said that we're shifting our case from mental health leave when our framework is too robust, right? But the fact of the matter is the anti-retaliatory laws and documentation that's already built into leave frameworks actually creates that paper trail, which causes structural shift. I'm moving to two rebuttals. They say that managers will perceive workers who take mental health leave as unreliable. The fact of the matter is perception follows structural signals. Before maternity leave was normalized, managers perceived women who took it as less committed. That perception diminished not through change values, but because anti-retaliation protections made acting on it costly, and repeated observation of women returning effectively dismantled the empirical bias. Our model changes the signal around mental health in the same identical manner. Also, anti-retaliation constrains the perception before it is acted upon. A manager who privately perceives a worker as unreliable but cannot act without legal consequence has a perception structurally neutralized. Or documentation requirements make subtle retaliation visible as patterns in data, changing the calculus for every manager simultaneously. They also bring this argument that we should fix the root causes, workload management and workplace structure. But the fact of the matter is, we dismantle this on three fronts, right? First, this is a sequencing argument disguised as an alternative. You cannot have honest conversations about unsustainable workloads in a culture where admitting struggle is career suicide. Normalized leave creates a psychological safety that makes root cause conversations possible. Their solution requires always that prerequisite, and they just can't admit it, right? My second point is that root cause reform is slower, more expensive, and harder to implement uniformly than a structured leave framework. Restructuring management culture requires training, buy-in, time, and sustained institutional will. Normalized leave can begin tomorrow and within existing sick leave law. My third point is that these things are actually not mutually exclusive. Nothing in our model prevents workload reform from happening simultaneously. The position rejected, the opposition is presenting a false dichotomy between two things that should coexist. I'll move to my first and only claim: normalizing mental health leave directly dismantles the structural conditions that produce it. And the logic behind this claim is that mental health leave doesn't improve workplace culture by solely making workplace healthier. As opposition has stated, we should actually improve it by forcing the organization to change how it operates. I'll move to my first word. Institutional visibility creates accountability. In Jamaica, with one psychiatrist per 22,000 people and no workplace mental health framework, psychological harm remains institutionally invisible, producing no policy, protocol, or employer accountability. This invisibility is not a flaw, but a deliberate feature. Unmeasured harm cannot be challenged. Normalizing mental health leave dismantles this silence permanently. Each request generates documentation, HR involvement, and return to work processes, creating data. That data produces automatic accountability. When specific teams or managers repeatedly generate mental health leave, structural problems become visible in organizational records. Toxic management and unsustainable can no longer be denied, rejected. Burnout transformed from invisible suffering into measurable attributable patterns. This shifts organizational culture fundamentally. Managers act differently knowing psychological conditions are now recorded. Employers design work differently, recognizing patterns of absence are institutionally visible. And behavior changes not because attitude shifted, but because information available changes. Without normalizing, this accountability never emerges. Harm remains invisible, employers face no obligation to respond, and toxic structures reproduce indefinitely behind institutional silence. A silence that normalized mental health leave permanently dismantles. I'll take your point right now.
Okay, Speaker, under the motion, we don't believe that it's fair for you to force managers to take up to be accountable for the psychological welfare of them.
I'll cut you off there. The fact of the matter is, if you're implementing a leave system, where there is documentation, where bosses and CEOs and the board can see documentation, where specific departments are actually causing mental health, but actually causing workers to miss out, and they're actually losing out because of that, questions will be raised. That documentation is not being forced by us, it's being forced by the board and business in their very nature, because they're profit maximizing organizations, and they want the best output possible, right? My second word: legal protection restructures employer power. In Jamaica's high unemployment labor market, workers lack credible exit options and therefore real leverage. Every workplace interaction occurs within a structure that systematically favors employers. Mental health disclosure becomes irrational because honesty is professionally fatal. Anti-retaliation protections that are built into leave systems changes completely. They convert disclosure from personal risk into a legally protected act, making retaliation institutionally costly. This deeper effect is structural. When retaliation becomes costly for every employer simultaneously, incentives governing employer behavior shift across the entire labor market. Employers become incentivized to create environments where disclosure is safe, not from empathy, because the law has changed what is rational for them to do so. This restructures employer power independently of goodwill. Workers know their mental health is protected, disclose earlier, report problems honestly, and engage authentically, because the power structure can no longer punish them for doing so. This shifts organizational information, conversations, and which problems get addressed rather than suppressed. A workplace where workers are structurally safe enough to be honest is categorically different from one where they are not. Produced not by change values, but by change change structural incentives. Without normalized leave and its protections, the power imbalance remains unconstrained. Employers retain discretion to penalize psychological struggle, workers retain no enforceable claim, and the rational choice remains silent, the structural opposite of meaningful cultural improvement. My third and final warrant, structural pressure forces workplace reform. Toxic workplace culture is sustained not by bad values alone, but by operational norms that make toxic behavior structurally irrational. Presenteeism, overwork, and burnout persist, because measurement systems reward presence and ignore psychological limitations. Normalized mental health leave disrupts these mechanics to operational necessity. When a worker takes protected leave, managers must redistribute their workload. If one absence creates an operational crisis, the problem was never the absence, it was that the workload was never sustainably structured. Simultaneously, performance systems have to evolve. Workers on protected leave cannot be evaluated on presence-based metrics without legal exposure, right? Organizations therefore have to develop output-based assessment frameworks that measure what workers actually produce rather than how long they sit at desks. This dismantles presenteeism in its entirety, not because anyone decided it's wrong, but because protected leave made presence-based assessment untenable, right? Without normalized leave, none of these pressures emerge. Workload imbalances remain invisible, performance systems continue rewarding endurance, and toxic norms reproduce automatically without any structural was ever requiring them to change.
And thank you very much. That was, ladies and gentlemen, the second speaker from Wolmer's Boys School, Jordan Dixon. And so, to extend the debate for team opposition, we invite their second speaker, Demario Ferguson.
For timekeeping purposes, I'll start my debate in three. I'll start my speech in three. Wait, can you hear me?
Loud and clear, Demario.
Okay. For timekeeping purposes, I'll start my speech in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, honorable panel, fellow debaters, good day. My name is Demario Ferguson, and I stand in proud opposition to the motion that this House believes that normalizing mental health leave would meaningfully improve workplace culture. Proposition's model does far more than normalize mental health leave. They introduce manager training, workplace reforms, and mental health leave programs. But those are independent policies that could exist even without normalizing mental health leave. If those reforms are what actually improve workplace culture, then the improvement is coming from those reforms, not the normalizations itself. Up to here in the debate, both sides mostly agree that the definitions of this debate and parts of status quo. Specifically, the main issues affecting workplace culture are structure. So proposition presents to us this sort of nuanced idea that normalizations of mental health leave won't fix these issues, but rather the side effects of normalizing mental health leave will. As second speaker, I will analyze why this is unlikely to change status quo due to the burnout already being visible and mental health leave being visible to use as a band-aid. So let's go deeper into the analysis of status quo. Both sides of this house agree that the problems with workplace culture in Jamaica are largely structural. For example, staff have heavy workloads, deal with toxic managers, and lack of resources, all leading to the deterioration of mental health. The deeper analysis in that managers are already aware of these issues in status quo. Managers have clear indicators that workers are overworked, exit interviews, high turnover rates, and company statistics, yet they do nothing, Mr. Speaker. That's why we find it hard to believe that mental health leave will magically incentivize them to fix the system. So the central question for this debate is whether or not mental health leave will likely cause meaningful improvement of the workplace. Proposition tells you that after following a long chain of events, each depending on low probability of its precursor, will eventually lead to a structural reform. Our thesis is that mental health leave alone is highly unlikely to incentivize any real change to deep-rooted structural issues in this debate. So now to win, proposition must prove that the mechanism works and brings about a meaningful impact to the system. If we prove that mechanism does not work or it won't bring about a significant improvement to the system, we simply win this debate. Very important in this debate is the impact has to be meaningful to workplace culture. So the debate cannot solely be they prove that it brings about some change to structure, but change that meaningfully improves the culture of the office. Allow me to go into my first substantive. Proposition assumes that when employees take mental health leave, employers will suddenly see the structures problems causing burnout. But the truth is that mental health leave is extremely noisy and ambiguous symbol. Managers cannot reliably tell when someone is taking leave. They can say it's just personal stress or family issues, relationship difficulties, or they can't even tell if it's just actual workplace burnout. The signal is unclear. Mental health leave does not automatically reveal why systemic issues in workloads, management, or staffing occurs. Think about it like this. If you try to diagnose a machine problem, but the error signals comes up for 10 different sources, you cannot know which part of it to fix. Proposition is asking you to trust that ambiguous signals alone while the trigger is unclear. The ambiguous signal alone will trigger expensive structural reform in workplace. That is highly unrealistic. Even if companies see employees taking leave, they cannot automatically identify what part of the system is failing. As a result, reform is unlikely to happen. The trigger is simply does not work. The second going to is incentives block reform. Even if you grant proposition that companies do detect burnout, we still have the fundamental problem of incentives. Many workplaces benefit from understaffing, long hours, and high productivity expectations. These structures save money, boost output, and maintain existing hierarchies. To actually form the system, organizations would need to hire more workers, lower productivity demands, and change management systems. All of these changes are expensive and inconvenient, Mr. Speaker. So even when burnout is visible, companies often tolerate it rather than reform. The signals exist, but the incentive to act does not. Leave becomes a cheap band-aid, not a catalyst for structural change. We argue that normalizing mental health leave can actually reduce the pressure of organizations in the structural problems. When burnout occurs in the absence of mental health, the consequences are often so severe. Workers may reach a breaking point and resign entirely, creating staffing shortages and disrupting productivity. Those kinds of disruptions place significant pressures on employers to reconsider workloads, staffing levels, or management practices. However, when mental health leave is normalized, organizations gain a way to manage burnout without addressing its root cause. Workers who are overwhelmed step away temporarily, recover for a short period of time, and then return to the same environment that caused the burnout in the first place, Mr. Speaker. Instead of focusing on forcing organizations to confront structural issues, mental health leave allows companies to treat burnout as an individual problem that can be temporarily managed rather than a systemic issue that must be fixed. In effect, it becomes a pressure valve. It releases just enough pressure from the system to keep it functioning, but it does not change the underlying conditions that created the burnout problem. This means that normalizations may help individuals in short term, but it does not generate the sustained pressure needed to transform workplace culture. The structures that define workplace culture are workloads, staffing problems, and expectations of availability.
Time.
Largely unchanged.
Thank you very much. That was, ladies and gentlemen, Demario Ferguson from Cornwall College. Whew. At this point in time, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to go into the second period of cross-examination. The rules remain largely the same. The only difference is that this time we will invite proposition. Rather, the rules are in this competition completely the same. So once again, we invite team opposition to pose their questions to team proposition.
Okay, so under the motion, can you explain whether or not it's the fact that that mental health leave is now legalized, or if it's actually the other policies, the list of policies you listed alongside it that are bringing about the benefits? Because it's a very important difference to make here.
First of all, I'm not sure if you're listening to another debate, but I only propagated one policy here. And that is the fact that, listen, mental health leave is going to be a part of the general structure of sick leave. I'm not even giving you a new policy. It's something that already exists. We're just amending it. And what we're saying is that under mental health leave, persons are going to have this allotted period of time where they're still getting paid, but they can take time off work if it is that necessary. And we're telling you that this is not going to disproportionately affect employers, because the fact is they're going to try to avoid that reality in entirety, and the culture is going to shift to try to preserve these persons.
Okay, Speaker, I don't know if you don't remember your case, but you told us that managers actually are going to be incentivized now to actually care about the well-being of their workers. So how does mental health leave being normalized actually do that, and not the fact that you're forcing employers to be more like empathetic, etc., and change the system?
So let me show you why this actually happens, right? Why mental health triggers this domino effect. The fact of the matter is, things like turnover data, things like absenteeism data, things like grievance data, those things don't tell you the exact reasons why workers have turned, or exact reasons why workers leave. The fact of the matter is, they just say that those things occur. And when those things occur, that is data that triggers a signal requiring investigation. And what firms need to do, firms will investigate those things. So for mental health leave, it works simultaneously. If there's a leave cluster in one department, that on its own doesn't prove toxic management, but the fact of the matter is, it proves that something needs to be investigated, right? And investigation is precisely what the status quo with zero data never produces, right?
And the fact is, we're not implementing a new system again. This is employment law that already actually exists, and it outlines a burden that these employers have towards their employees. So if it is that they're working in these significantly toxic environments, they're going against law. They're not going against some policy that we're propagating. It's something that is generally well known and exists currently.
Okay, so Speaker, I don't know where in the law that exists, but also, can you just tell us still, how does this incentivize employees to actually fix the structural problems, even though fixing structural reform is much cheaper than sending workers home to take mental health leave, when structural reform is, once again, far more expensive?
I'll reiterate this again, right? The fact of the matter is, mental health leave, it creates a domino effect. We're not creating separate mechanisms. What we're showing to you is that through mental health leave, we provide the data that generates signals that will lead to businesses investigating, okay, why are these things happening? Why are workers taking these sorts of leaves? And why, and because it's affecting their output, because of affecting how much productivity their business actually generates, those things will be structured, investigated, and then those changes can be made, right? Every form of data, as I said, is a signal that needs interpretation and investigation. And if a cluster of mental health operates in one department, that signals that something is wrong, even though it may not say the specific cause. And once that investigation happens, then businesses will see the cause and then change that.
All right, thank you very much. We now invite Team Wolmer's Boys School to pose their 3 questions.
Yes.
Okay, Speaker. So firstly, at the opposition leader, we get that the burden of proof for us is that we need to prove that meaningfully improve, it means transform the culture entirely. Firstly, that's not our burden, but we've already showed you that we increase productivity, psychological safety, and the hustle and bustle culture that we directly contend with. On these 3 fronts, do we not achieve meaningful improvement?
Well, in short, no, but in long, once again, we never said that you have to completely fix the system. We said that there has to be meaningful change. And as a matter of fact, we argue that increasing productivity, as a matter of fact, the 3 arguments you just claimed are 3 clashes, and 3 clashes that I am sure we've won. So once again, you can't just say outright that you won these clashes and just get the point for that because you feel like you're meaningfully improving workplace culture. So once again, Speaker, we're not saying you need to fix the system entirely. We're saying there has to be a large amount, or yes, a large amount of change to the culture. And the culture is the structure of the workplace. And if you can't prove change to the workplace, then you lose the debate.
Okay, you tell us that taking mental health leave makes the employee look unreliable, and so they're not going to be incentivized to actually take it. However, we showed you that normalization takes place because conversations are now able to happen when we remove the stigma. You need to prove, as according to your burden, how we will not or cannot achieve this, and you have not told us that. Please tell us.
Speaker, conversations, people don't care about conversations. Once again, as I always say, policy can't Speaker. So when they're in the workplace, what they see on the grounds is the rule that's going to govern them. And the rule that governs them is the people that are constantly available. Those are the people that get promoted. You don't get promoted if you're mentally unstable. You don't get promoted if you're physically unstable. That is the rule. So we argue that no matter how much policy you implement, the manager always going to promote people that are constantly available.
All right, so Last and final question, right? How do you contend with the fact that anti-retaliatory laws, which are built into leave frameworks, constraints managers and employees from actually restricting promotions based on the fact that employees actually take leave, right? And we've seen this in other frameworks like maternity leave. So why would that not work here?
Speaker, there's laws for everything and people take advantage of it anyways. As you stated before, the law is in place, and what do we still see in the workplace? If somebody has cancer and needs to take 3 months leave, do you believe that they're going to be promoted to, for example, principal? No, because they're seen as physically unable to take up the post, right? So what we're saying is that these structures that are in place are what needs to be changed, and those are the promotion incentives. Those are the things that your model cannot change. So once again, the burden of proof is no longer on us, because we've seen normalization not fix the problems. The burden of proof is on you to prove that in Jamaica, it will actually lead to such a significant change in the actual workplace culture. And you cannot prove that, Speaker, hence you can't win the debate.
All right, all right, ladies and gentlemen. What a debate we have had so far. At this point in time, we're going to pause for 1 minute, and that 1 minute is to allow the finishing touches to be placed on those reply speeches, after which we'll invite the opposition reply speaker, followed by the proposition reply speaker.
All right, Ravon.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, to conclude this debate for side opposition, we invite the reply speaker from Cornwall College.
Just to verify that I'm audible.
Yes, I can hear you.
For timekeeping purposes, I'll begin in 3, 2, 1. Mr. Speaker, just to clarify the case a little bit, I would love to go into 3 points that side proposition would have tried to enhance today. For example, we have the point of productivity. Both of my speakers, Mr. Speaker, have spoken about burnout once again. The fact is you cannot bring the same worker that was rejuvenated by mental health leave to come back into the same structural system. That isn't perfect. Because of that, it can simply not be held. And because of that, we won't get the net benefits that side proposition has been advocating for. And so once again, productivity will be affected if it is that we cannot fix the very intensive structural changes that we need, Mr. Speaker. So going into my speech, the proposition has built a case on a hopeful trigger chain. The idea that if we simply normalize leave, employers will magically see the light and fix the system. But as the opposition has proven, workplace culture is not a vibe or a polite conversation. It is a rigid structure of workload expectations, management practices, and promotion incentives. To win, the proposition had to prove that an individual leave policy can transform these collective systems. They have failed. Allow me to dismantle their case and show why the opposition wins this debate through 3 decisive clashes. First clash being the signal versus the noise. The proposition argues that normalizing leave can provide a clear signal of burnout that forces reform. We have shown that this is a fundamental misunderstanding of corporate reality. For burnout is already visible. Employers do not need a new signal. They already see high turnover, scathing exit interviews, and massive productivity losses. These are much louder and more expensive alarms than a few days of leave. If these stronger signals have not forced structural reform, Mr. Speaker, it is unrealistic to believe that a mental health day will suddenly break through the corporate wall. The weak signal problem. If employers look at leave data, it is inherently noisy and ambiguous. A manager cannot easily distinguish between workplace burnout and personal crises like family issues or relationship stress because the cause is unclear. Organizations cannot reliably diagnose structural problems and existing data. Furthermore, Mr. Speaker, workers already have stronger indicators for bargaining, such as overtime hours and injury rates. If these haven't triggered reform, leave data certainly will not. Which leads me to my second clash being the pressure valve versus structural fix. The most significant propositions in the world solution actually prevents reform they claim to want. Outcome is collapse, staff quit, and the system fails. However, normalized leave acts as a pressure valve. It lets out just enough steam so the system can keep grinding, allowing the system to manage burnout temporarily without ever fixing the underlying causes, which leads me to a pig in the muddy pen analogy. Our team gave you the definitive analogy for this debate. Proposition wants to take the worker or the pig out of the toxic environment, which is the muddy pen, and wash them with a few days of leave and then drop them back into the same filth. Despite the normalization of leave, 2/3 of workers still report burnout. You didn't clean the pen, only creates a cycle of burnout, leave, return, and repeat. Collective burden. When one person takes leave, the workload does not just vanish, Mr. Speaker, it is dumped onto the colleagues. This creates a rolling cycle of understaffing that makes the entire environment more unstable for everyone else, which leads into our third and most important clash, Mr. Speaker, which is the economic reality of incentives. The proposition assumes that once an employer sees burnout, they will fix it. We have proven that the incentives are stacked against them. Leave is cheaper than reform. Meaningful structural change requires hiring more staff and reducing output expectations. It is far cheaper for a company to grant 10 days of leave than hire 5 new workers or lower their profit margins. Leave becomes a manageable cost that allows companies to keep the always-on culture exactly as it is. The stigma of incentives. Proposition claims normalization removes stigma, but stigma is created by incentives, not silent. As long as promotion rewards constant availability, taking leave will always carry a professional penalty. You cannot remove stigma while the consequences that create it, like being labeled unreliable, remain unchanged. Why opposition wins, Mr. Speaker? The comparison is stark. In proposition's world, we see a band-aid on a gaping wound. It is a world of symptomatic management where the burden of wellness is shifted onto the individual while the structural causes, toxic managers, and unmanageable workloads stay swept under the rug. In opposition's world, we strip away the masks. We acknowledge that workplace culture is defined by the environment workers face every day, not the days that they are absent. They are yet to prove how these structural issues are fixed, including understaffing, heavy workloads, and toxic managers. That's what really causes the harm to the workplace culture, not the lack of policy. The proposition offers relief after the damage is done. We show you why the damage keeps happening. For these reasons, we are proud to oppose and win the debate. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That was the third and final speaker from Cornwall College, Andrew Kamak. And now, to conclude the debate overall, we invite the final speaker, that is the proposition reply speaker, Alden Williams.
Am I audible?
Go again, Alden.
Am I audible?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. I'll begin my speech on my next word. Starting with the bottom, the opposition claims that fundamental institutional managerial change is more important than mental health in changing workplace culture. But we argue that the biggest contributors to workplace culture are employees, not employers. The same way culture is shaped by society and not the government. Therefore, improving mental health of each individual through recalibration will have the greatest impact on workplace culture. Culture is shaped by people, not power. Let's give them best case scenario where they say that burnout persists because managers don't care. But if a manager knows that an employee can leave because their mental health is harmed, it forces the manager to change the workplace structure to ensure that they don't lose the utility of the labor they pay for. This managerial change is not by policy, but rather a consequence of our model. They claim that we clean the pig and leave the pen. But if the pig can leave whenever the pen is dirty, you have to clean the pen to keep him. Right? The opposition claims that when people take leave, they look unreliable. But if they have mental health issues and don't address them, the burnout that will ensue cause much more worse results than a day of mental health. And anti-retaliatory laws constrain managers from acting. So what the manager thinks doesn't actually matter. Promotion is all about objective data. let's go into the clashes, right? First clash asks us, does mental health leave weaken or strengthen workplace performance? The opposition's argument is that normalizing mental health leave will reduce productivity through abuse, absenteeism, and declining resilience. But this misunderstands how productivity actually functions. The proposition proves that mental health distress is already suppressing productivity today. This isn't because employees are absent, but because they're present while cognitively impaired, distracted, exhausted, and disengaged. They're physically there, but mentally elsewhere. The opposition's model preserves that exact same problem, but we intercept it. First, structured mental health creates early intervention as short, early breaks reduce long-term absence significantly. One day recovery prevents weeks of collapse later. Opposition fears absenteeism, but their one actually produces longer and more damaging absence because workers delay support until burnout becomes severe, at which point we see high turnover, poor work ethic, and workload imbalance. Second, normalization removes cognitive tax of concealment. Employees who hide personal struggles lose working capacity and decision quality. When workers constantly pretend to be fine, their mental bandwidth shrinks. Or removes that stigma, and workers stop wasting mental energy hiding distress. Third, recovery multiplies performance. Employees who took adequate recovery periods showed 45% reductions in emotional exhaustion and significantly higher task performance afterwards. This means that leave does not merely pause productivity, but restores it. Opposition's model keeps burned out employees working at half capacity, but our model revitalizes them. If the workplace culture is defined by daily interaction, cooperation, and performance, the side that restores employee capacity is the side that improves culture. Clash 2 asks us, does mental health leave transform culture or merely treat symptoms? Opposition argues that mental health only treats symptoms and fails to address the root cause of poor workplace culture. But the proposition demonstrates the opposite, right? See, existing workplace solutions such as wellness workshops, motivational seminars, etc., are discretionary, meaning managers can ignore them, companies can defund them, and therefore their benefits are not guaranteed. Mental health fundamentally changes institutional operation. Firstly, it introduces non-discretionary protection. Once formalized within sick leave frameworks, leave cannot be withheld on a managerial basis or workplace stigma. That guarantees its benefits. Second, it signals psychological safety. When a workplace formally recognizes mental health as legitimate, it reshapes behavior across the organization. Employees feel safer speaking up about workload issues, burnout, and systemic stressors. That transparency allows organizations to identify and correct toxic practices that previously silently manifested. Opposition's world preserves stigma and secrecy. Workers remain silent about stress, problems go unreported, and dysfunction flourishes underground. Our world replaces silence with institutional acknowledgement and recalibration. That is how culture improves. Let's look at the real world impact, right? The real world problem right here is clear. Burnout, disengagement, and toxic workplace cultures are rising. Workers feel unsafe, admitting distress, so they continue working while mentally depleted. This leads to declining productivity, conflict, high turnover, and employees surviving instead of thriving. The root cause of this is burnout stigma combined with the absence of formal recovery mechanisms. When mental health struggles remain hidden, employees cannot intervene early. Stress accumulates until it explodes into burnout, resignation, or workplace breakdown. Normalizing mental health leave directly attacks its root cause by removing stigma, legitimizing recovery, and providing an institutional pathway for early intervention. Workers recover before crisis, teams function with greater empathy, and organizations gain transparency about stressors affecting performance. Once again, the opposition claimed that we're going to clean the pig and leave the pen alone. But if you know that the pig is going to leave the pen is dirty, you have to fix the pen to keep him, right? When culture shifts from concealment to support, burnout declines, productivity stabilizes, and trust within teams grow. By eliminating the stigma that sustains workplace dysfunction, normalized mental health does not just treat the problem, it removes the conditions that fostered it in the first place and therefore meaningfully improves workplace culture. With that being said, proud to
All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for that debate. Thank you so much for that context. Thank you so much for that fight. It was well appreciated. This match is one that is well indicative of the semi-finals of this competition. And I venture this was a grand finals worthy contest. So, with that said, the judges are going to excuse themselves to another space, and we will be back shortly with the results of this match to determine who will be going up at the end of this month into early next month at JCSA Park to be fighting for the championship title and who will be fighting for the third place finish. We'll be back soon.